Vito started with discussing the name of the channel that will have these like recordings and stuff. So that should be
Yep.
super exciting. Um, and then I don't know. I think we can just start. I really like this chapter. Nina has already shared that she also really liked this chapter. And it's just kind of like what I was talking about last week. I feel like the last chapter was really just setting us up for a roller coaster of discussion um, with this chapter, and I think also the following chapter with Wu Wei. So, does anyone have anything they want to start with? Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay, let me look at my notes.
I know I'm pulling my notes up now. I should have been more prepared.
So, so something that was actually brought up last week, I had written for this chapter, and I didn't want to share it too much because I didn't want to like talk about stuff we hadn't read. But it was something you had mentioned, Nina, and it's talking about concerning effort, right? Like when you try to be a certain way, and often um, with Taoism, a really big thing that we talk about is virtue, and how someone who tries to be virtuous, or even a different way, someone who tries to be a good person is sort of doing it in vain, right? Because you can't. I mean, trying to be a good person, just out of like effort of just saying like I'm good, with all these back shelf intentions and everything, it kind of takes the virtue out of it. And Taoism is like true virtue is completely unaware of its own virtue, and therefore it is very virtuous. And so something in this chapter right away that we're given is something I really liked was the note, by intending to accord, you immediately deviate. So our intentions and our goals, while maybe they're good, they can set us like on a different course than we really are expecting to go on. Um, and I really like that. And I think it really speaks to like all of our efforts. And while our efforts are good, they're not really necessary to be what we're like aiming to be when we're talking about like the Tao, or like being present, or just being. There's nothing that's needed. And then like any added effort into that is stepping away from that.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about that piece as well. Obviously, I wrote it up last week, but then I was thinking about it in a different lens this week, in the lens of like service. And, you know, when you're trying to help somebody out, you have to think about like what that intention is, I guess, right? So it's like, am I doing service because it makes me feel good, or am I doing service because I'm trying to make somebody else feel good? And then it's like, am I trying too hard in any there to like to do anything, like if I'm trying hard to make a difference,
Mhm.
and what is that difference? And I was like, this is kind of a dilemma of like what service actually is and how service fits into Taoism, really. Like,
Mhm.
because we talked about last week the whole um, not taking away somebody's suffering. And it's like, do you ever just do service without expecting some kind of return from it, whether it's for you or for somebody else? And it was kind of puzzling for me to think about, like, how that is.
I think it's really hard. A lot of times in this group we talk about the impact of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one impact culture really has, along with service, is that like the term that gets thrown around is like leave the world in a better place than you found it. Leave something,
Mm-hmm.
people in a better place than you found them. And that's often like a measure of you, like your impact, like what you're capable of. And then you could even take it further. It's like, what's your intent? Like, are you trying to be good? Are you trying to be
Mhm.
helpful? And you know, if you're putting a lot of effort into something, there's a point where you could probably start to feel that, if you're trying so hard, is it because that you lack it? Like, are you trying to
Mhm.
prove something? And I mean, it's a huge hang up. It's a lot of like, judgment on yourself. I feel like guilt is riddled through everything that we do. There's so
Mhm.
much that comes from guilt. And so, in terms of service, there's always like, if you're being like, there's a certain like service minded way where you just feel like, am I doing enough? Is this the right service I should be doing? And it can be just a complete mess,
Yeah, and, like,
in a lot
maybe
of
it comes from,
ways.
like, atonement as well of, like,
Ooh, yeah.
yeah, that just trying to, like, make up for something that you felt like you should have done better before previously, or, like, that guilt piece, like you're saying. But yeah, like, where does it end with service? It's like it's almost, I mean, because the field I work in is, I mean, the at its core is service,
Hmm.
and that's what's hard to, like, wrap my head around is, like, I'm getting this, like, joy from helping others, but am I seeking, like, that end goal of, like, "Okay, they're fixed now," and then am I going around and, like, trying to find that everywhere else? And that's where, like, the whole, like, conversation came up in my head about, um especially along with this chapter where they're talking about forcing things and how you can't force anything, and, um, for that, forcing something will have the opposite effect in a way.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's what I found interesting this week and was kind of, uh, clouding my brain a bit. I'm like, "I can't figure this one out. This is a hard one to figure out."
Yeah. I think a lot comes from acceptance in this. Like,
Mhm,
if you can accept your own nature and you can accept your own intentions, um, there's a lot that comes out of that. And if you can just let that be and work through that. I mean, we were just talking about before book club how things don't work out the way we always think they do. Like, the end goal might be the same, but the way we got there was not the way we thought it was going to be.
mhm,
And so I always wonder, like, what all could really come from just approaching things with that, like, mentality of like full acceptance, um,
mhm.
and allowing yourself to deal with like the guilt and judgment that comes with it. Ray, what were you gonna say?
Uh, along these lines, I think something that's really appealing to me about Taoism is just like the elegant simplicity that like it doesn't go out of its way to talk about service or to talk about how this looks in practice, really. But, it just sort of like paints a picture of the essence of it from which you can extrapolate. So an example is like page 47 where he's quoting, I think it's chapter 32 of the Tao Te Ching. It's the highest good is like water, for the good of water is that it nourishes everything without striving. And so that's just like a very clear picture of what service can look like through Taoism, right? Water is just being water. It's nature. It's just flowing, going with itself. It's not
Mhm,
trying to, doesn't have any expectations, and yet just by doing that, it nourishes all the life around it.
Mm.
And I think it's valuable to have all these other traditions that more explicitly spell out how to work with service because, we're not all wise sages who can just read this stuff and instantly grasp the meaning of how to apply it. But I think there's something, yeah, just an elegant simplicity of Taoism, just
mhm,
putting that energy out there without too much that maybe doesn't need to be said.
That note on water, I think, is very important. And I mean, water is and breathing are two things that always come up in conversations about Taoism, because we talked about virtue, right? And breathing and water are considered to be like some of the highest virtues. Um, because water is not really mindful of anything that it does, right? But it
Mhm.
is like the life source for everything. Like it is essential, and it could care less, you know. Um, and I guess when we talk about those things, and we just talk about nature in general in terms of Taoism, um, I tend to think about people, humans, and what is our like true nature. And I mean that's a really hard thing to dig through, because I feel that different cultures have a different take on this. I definitely think there's a culture that I mean that believes in original sin, and that just from the beginning we're behind, we're off. And Nina, it's like you said, there's atonement, and immediately with that there's guilt, because if you're atoning for something, then you must feel guilty about it.
Mhm.
And I mean, really, I feel like if you're acting out of guilt, you're kind of split into two. There's something that you feel like you must and that you should do, and any time that you feel like you must or should do or something must happen, I feel like there has to be a certain degree of which you're removed from that, because you're not acting within your own nature or will, because that must or should is imposed by something other than you. I mean, you may have adopted it yourself and made it your own, but we're talking about your nature, like just where you start without like outer influence. And I often think of babies. Like what what do babies do? Like what is their like natural function? And I was talking with a friend about this earlier in the week, and I mean, babies were brought up in this chapter. Just like what the state of mind of a child, like what that's like, and what they do is connect and learn. Like babies can learn anything. They can learn any language. They can adopt any culture, and they do that without ever being told that they need to. It's just what they do. And so that's kind of like where I start. Like that's our nature. That's what we do. And that's sort of like a guiding principle, I guess, or a guiding thought in these sorts of things.
What do you what's your guys' take on the thing which Nina said mentioned something? Oh, am I helping this person for like a selfish reason, or am I helping this person for themselves? I feel there needs to be both. But I feel culturally it is more appropriate to help someone in a more selfless fashion, where you are not getting anything from that, but you're like giving. I think that's culturally more appropriate, I guess. But I feel there needs to be both. Know what I mean? What's your guys' thoughts on that?
So it reminds me of that Friends episode where it's like there's no such thing as a good deed. And it's like, I forget who it is. Maybe it's Joey, like tries to run around doing good stuff for people, but they keep calling him out. Oh, you're just doing it so you feel good. It's really pressing on that paradox of like, why are you doing this? Who's the one who's benefiting? Um, it is an interesting thing, and he just Ramdas has all the keywords to say here. And I just read his book on called How Can I Help, which is all about service. And the real thrust of the argument is that service is best done when you're in a non-attached state, sort of just like the image of water just flowing,
Mhm.
and not really worrying. Well, you can worry about what you'll get out of it, but not being attached to those worries, right? You just see them and let them go.
Yeah,
It's like if you're letting go of all those concerns about, can I keep doing this? Am I going to burn out? Blah blah blah. Then there's an energy that comes from not getting wrapped up in those stories that allows you to continue to just be present for others in a way that's nourishing for really everyone involved. Those questions about who's benefiting fall away a bit because it's just like everyone's benefiting. There's no self or other. It's just this service happening. That's the ideal, but in practice, people get burnt out. Don't see things clearly.
You
Yeah, well, I
know,
There's
think that's. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, no,
Go
no.
ahead,
You
Nina.
can go ahead.
Yeah, you can go
I
ahead,
was just
Nina.
saying that I think like the dilemma and when it comes to service and you're just, you know, just you alone and it's personal, right? And it just comes naturally, like someone comes to your door and says, hey, can you help me do some stuff in my yard or whatever? I need help carrying stuff. And you just naturally, it's like, oh, yeah, sure. And then, or a friend calls you and is like, I'm going through something and it just kind of pops up. But then the tricky part comes when you're like, for me at least, when my job is wrapped up in it, right? And then at the end of the day, it's like there's goals that have to be met. So you're constantly being judged on whether your service is good enough. So it's like that's where the water gets muddy a little bit, and that's what like led me this week to start thinking about that. Is like I'm forcing service on everybody at work,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm expected to have some result, but just having that mindfulness alone, um, that's what like the job kind of is trying to funnel me into. I think helps me become better at doing service in that environment because I'm kind of consciously like recognizing it, but then letting that piece go and saying, okay, well, at the end of the day, I don't care what shows up on paper. I just care that we're happy and we're having a good day, kind of thing. Um, Without getting like too much into all the nuances of the day, but it's yeah, I think that that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But if you look at service from this perspective of just, you know, when something comes, I react to it and provide it in that way without any kind of thought of, you know, did I do a good job or is this going to make me feel better?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's when it becomes like how you were talking about, right? Just flowing with water, like water.
Yeah, I'm in the midst of it also. You know, I talk about I'm doing this climate change and experience a bit of what, sort of Boots was alluding to. It's like, is this the right form of service? Is it blah blah blah? It's like on one hand, I'm trying to leverage my skills that I have, which is like research and writing and reading, communicating to, you know, benefit others really. But um you sort of don't get that feeling of like being directly in contact with somebody and like being it feels like you're removed from the suffering that you're trying to alleviate. And it's like, where does that evaluation come into it, And it's like, also, I spend all day doing research and then I got to sit and do this also. So like, I'm tired, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
I bet.
yeah. So it's like, how can I apply that to this also? Just letting go of weariness of trying to think. It just speaks to the diversity that service form that it can take.
There was something I read from Ram Dass where he was talking about Gandhi, and I can't remember verbatim what all this was. I might be able to. I have so many notes of things that I like either copy and paste or write out thoughts about. I might be able to find it at some point. Um, but it was talking about service, and actually, I think this might have been in Ram Dass's "Becoming Nobody," because he was basically talking about even if like your like just say your nature was like just so like service intended, like you were so service minded, and like there would still be things happening that you couldn't do, and you could like get yourself wrapped up in all the things that you couldn't do, right? And then like when you're at that stage, like where are you really when you're thinking about all the things that you can't do rather than the things that you have done or that you want to do or that you are doing now. And so he's talking about this, and he you know, has an excerpt from Gandhi where, Gandhi talks about, um, it's obviously about compassion and suffering and all of us sort of like working together. And he puts it into like this model of just all of us being a part of a body, and how the hand is not the not the foot, but the hand can care for the foot, and our world and just our societies are like this, and it's all it can all be seen as all these efforts as like a healing process. And I don't know, I think this gets viewed at and it can be viewed at several levels, and I mean it's such a hard thing. And then we have topics like you brought up last time, Rave, with a lot that we talk about in this group. It's sort of like removing a lot of this like service that we're talking about too, is like removing like a certain identity that we have, right, and acting out of that space where you're a little less ego, you're a little less you and a little more something else, where you feel a deeper connection to things. But there are issues, like legitimate issues today, that require such an identity to remedy the issue. And it just really goes to show how deep and complex this sort of topic is. Um, in terms of the book and for the Tao itself, all of these things uh, are not really problems, and that's really hard to digest at first, because I think immediately we could think of 100 arguments of why all these things are problems. Like
Yeah.
they have immediate impact on us. Um, they're painful, they're hard, unfair, and so I think that was my challenge. I had a very like justice mindset, like justice fixed mindset, um, a few years ago. I kind of like talked about that where like I used to like debate all the time. I was like even in college I would debate, and the whole goal of that is convincing people, and then along with that belief is the belief that you can convince people, and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of this is sort of taking all those beliefs and looking at the other side of them. And there's a lot that I personally have found in that, and I think there is a lot to find in general. And it is sort of a relief in a way, but also very confusing in others.
Well, it's funny to me. It makes me think about all those back and forth, like yin and yang, like opposites, kind of, where it's like you're trying to help, but you feel helpless. You're trying to convince somebody of a point in a debate, but you're never going to be able to. Like, it's like, and they're doing the same thing back to you.
Hmm.
And then, like, just accepting that, because that's a huge part for me, is just accepting that I'm one person and I'm not going to be able to like help everybody, right? And
Hmm.
that's the frustrating thing. That's what sends a lot of us into burnout, is feeling like your efforts are not making a difference, I guess, and having to let go of, or just accept and feel and trust that whatever you're doing is in the big picture, which I think in the book it did a really good job about just talking about how we're all one and how it's like we're all moving together. And I thought, what was the really interesting point about I think it was called, it was about, they were talking about like cause and effect kind of,
You're reading
and
my
just
mind right now
thinking,
because that's the page I'm
yeah.
looking at.
Yeah, so like that thought that I forget the exact example, but it was like maybe something like a drought or something causes the famine and then people die and then so on and so forth, but looking at it as one event and not as the cause of other events.
Mm-hmm.
um and that goes along with thinking like when it comes from helping or service, that I think about like, yeah, I can't touch all the lives that I might want to, but thinking that if you plant a seed in one kid or make a difference in one kid, that it's going to affect others down the road. If you think about it that way, of like working with one kid and then they go out into the world, they're affecting the lives of all those other people, so that one event turns into this, it can turn into like a worldly event, so
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting, but it helps me kind of just take that step back and take the deep breath again and be like, okay, you have to let go of some of these expectations
Yeah.
and just let it be.
I was actually looking at a different page, but it is about cause and effect. I had a
Hmm.
note for page 42. I had a lot of notes for it. Um, so it starts with, I think this will relate to what you were sharing.
Hmm.
It starts with talking about the Tao, and it says, it may be attained but not seen, or in other words, felt but not conceived, intuited but not categorized, divined but not explained. In a similar way, air and water cannot be cut or clutched, and their flow ceases when they are enclosed. There is no way of putting a stream in a bucket or a wind in a bag. And it goes on later and says laws like law of causation treat of the network and not of what the network describes. For the game of Western philosophy and science is to trap the universe in the networks of words and numbers, so that there is always the temptation to confuse the rules or laws of grammar and mathematics with the actual operations of nature. That whole line, that whole like end of that paragraph, left me with a lot of thoughts. Um, it goes on to say, we must not, however, overlook the fact that human calculation is also an operation of nature. But just as trees do not represent or symbolize rocks, our thoughts, even if intended to do so, do not necessarily represent trees and rocks. Thoughts grow in brains as grass grows in fields. Any correspondence between them is abstract, as between 10 roses and 10 stones, which does not take into account the smell and color of the roses or the shapes and structures of the stones. Although that is in nature, we must not confuse the game rules of thought with the patterns of nature. And I think that relates a lot to cause and effect, because anytime we talk about cause and effect, we're kind of just pointing, right? We're looking like at a huge thing and we're just pointing, well, there it is. There, that's what it all led to. And then we're talking about like an effect, an outcome. But then like nothing stops. Like that's not the end resolution to something. And every effect ripples out and causes a lot more things. It's a cycle of things. Um, but we tend to like look at and categorize things as this or that, cause and effect, um, as very separately related incidents.
Yeah. The cause and effect thing is really interesting. What you said there. So, yeah. So you're saying that we naturally try to connect a cause with an effect, is it? Even if there is no connection, try to like see a connection, is it?
I would say that there could definitely be a connection, right? Like there's
Yeah,
obviously I pick up the ball, I throw the ball. Like that's like there is like a a cause. There's a reason for why the ball is on this side of the room and on the other side of the room.
yeah,
But I feel like these events are usually looked at as separate entities, and like as if we have the whole picture for all things and can say like this is just how it is. Like we've taken all things and all scenarios into account. uh it's sort of like in the book, um Rave, you may remember where Watts talks about looking through fence posts and seeing a cat walk by. And when if you've never seen a cat before and you watch a cat walk by in this like little slit of vision, you first see the head, the body, and then the tail, like in that sequence. And so you'll think, oh, okay, so like that's how cats work. They start with the head, they go to the body, and they end with a tail. And that's not like inherently wrong, but it doesn't really make sense because like there is no cat without the head. There is like no cat with like its lower half. Like the whole thing is a cat, like the entire thing. And by sectioning it, it's kind of like how we've talked about um like we way back we talked about nature and like looking at flowers and how like a kid or just anyone could like look at a flower and say it's so beautiful and I really like it. And then you have someone who studies like botany and flowers and they're like, oh, it's this species and it has these genetics and it has this difference opposed to other flowers. It's just two different ways of looking at something, and like there's an underlying reality and truth to those things, and like that perspective or that take on it isn't like wrong, but it's not like it's not like the explanation to just describe the flower or the cat. And so cause and effect are the same way, I feel.
Yeah, cause and effect. This is an area I was telling Nina that it's always thrown me for a loop because science is all about cause and effect. Like you're
yeah,
so in that you cited the fact that what Alan talks about here is that it's a concept. You're confusing the menu for the dinner. You're eating symbols. Um, so yeah, I think everything Boots said is absolutely right. It all depends on the point of view. So if you're looking at the cat passing through the fence, absolutely that yeah, if the head calls the body, whatever calls the tail. If that's all we ever saw, I believe that because we can see the cat as a whole, that point is so different.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same way that our point of view is in time. It's a really tricky. We are immersed in time. We think in time. This at this time point causes that time. That's our only point of view. But there's a point of view. Step back. This is what the Tao is all about, right? And see time as all happening, like the mutual co-arising, and that my thoughts about the past and my thoughts about the present or the future rather are only occurring in the present. And so these things that we call causes and effects, they're all just happening at the same time. That's what I think he's pointing to.
yeah.
Sure.
Cause and effect implies that there is like a past and future, no? Because only in that frame a cause and effect even like makes sense. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yep, all effects will happen somewhere other than right now. They'll happen
Yeah,
after.
yeah,
I think Rave, you bringing up the mutual arising is very important. That is constantly uh, mentioned in this chapter, like over and over. It's brought back to like this idea of mutually arising, and I find that is not the normal or like the first way um, my mind thinks of things. I mean, more and more when I read this stuff, of course, but before this, it was not at all like that. Um, it definitely kind of like grasped and thought about things in a cause and effect sort of way, and it did not see the relationship of everything. My favorite example is because this is yin and yang. This is being aware of one and not aware of the other. I mean, like when we read books, uh, like the whole point of the book is we're looking at the words on the page, and in our mind, for the purpose of understanding and reading, we have to see the words as different from the page. Because if we didn't, we just would see the page and be like, why is this book completely blank? But the words are the page. The page is the foundation for the words to be there, and the words really are just little dark marks that are styled in a certain way for us to absorb and understand. But there's a very fundamental relationship between the page and the words on the page. They mutually arise. They are dependent on each other when they don't exist without each other. And a lot of things work this way. A lot of things in our world and a lot of conflicts, a lot of even good things have this sort of relationship with their counterparts that doesn't always goes unacknowledged.
Yeah, I think I have fallen into that trap of thinking there's like a cause and effect, you know. Oh, this girl rejected me, so there must be that's the cause, right? And the effect is, oh, there's something wrong with me or whatever. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
While you were talking about that, I was just reflecting on how many things, how many causes and effects that I believe to be true that's not actually true, you know? Yeah, it is what it is, I guess.
The thing is, even if you're operating inside time, so you're buying into cause and effect, the reality is that causes are innumerable. Like causes are pretty much infinite. Everything's causing
Yeah,
everything. So I mean,
yeah. There's no
do-
specific cause.
right? There's dominant causes maybe, and that's like the best science can do. Is that when we run an
Mm,
analysis, we're explaining. I mean, in the human-based sciences especially, we're lucky to explain, I don't know, 20% of the variance.
yeah.
There's just so much that we just the rest is error. The rest is just stuff that you know we don't quite understand. It's just random variability. But that's all just like other things happening. So the reality is like if even if you're within time and thinking about cause and effect, it's just way more complicated than anyone really stops to think about.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially like when I apply it to myself in terms of trying to talk to women or whatever, it's like all you see is your little window into like, is she texting me back or not? Most of the time, if it's like, early stages like you're alluding to. And it's like human lives are so complicated. You have no idea what's going on the other end.
Yeah.
That's just something helpful for me to keep in my situation.
I think something that relates to this, um, because we've been sort of talking about a lot of this cause and effect discussion naturally uh, leads us to talking about science and the way that we do science, um, and the way that we uh, discover and learn things and build upon our knowledge. And one thing that one element that reading about this stuff has brought up for me that I always thought was interesting is the role of intuition, and how initially we think of science and intuition being completely separate. Like we keep intuition out of science. We want to keep things um, you know contained and organized to where, okay, well, we have like a theory, we have a hypothesis, and we have a way to test it. And if this then this happens, then we can say that we're right. And reading more about this makes me realize that intuition is deeply involved in science, because at the very end we have to decide. And just like in everyday lives, we have to decide when we feel like we know it, we have enough to say we're certain, and that is led by intuition. maybe it's a lot less, right? Like, you know, I think there's a difference between someone saying like, I feel like I've meditated really hard. I could start floating and fly in the air. I just feel that it's my intuitive feeling about this, versus like the intuition that kind of we find in studies and stuff. But really, we only have ourselves to decide like how far or how much we need or how far we need to go for things. And I found from my own self that I was completely unaware of this. That really, I mean, because like this comes up in self improvement, right? Like the paradox in self improvement, and going and like there's nothing wrong with like wanting to improve and like reading like self help books and stuff like that. But like the paradox is like you are the one has to do the improving. Like
Yeah.
like at the very end, like you are saying that I am not improved. I am not better, but I need to be. And so I'm going to go improve myself, but you are the object like trying to improve itself. And what I realized through that sort of like internal dialogue is that it was me drawing the line in the sand, placing like the marker where I needed to reach. That was in my control. Like that was my decision of like what better was, and it doesn't really take away from any effort that you make to make yourself better. But I think there's a lot to say in like that is within your like within your decision of like where do I need to be, and it kind of gets wrapped up in Watts saying the reason that you're not better is because you want to be. And that sat with me for quite a bit. This is like, wow, yeah, that's 100% true, because I am only less and I'm only not better when I decide that's how it is for my own decision.
Yeah, and I can add that intuition plays a huge part, particularly the genesis of theories that you go out and test. So, I mean, like, where do hypotheses come from? They come from
Hmm.
scientists'
Mhm.
imagination, um, and your ideas are only good until a better idea comes along. And so, you know, Earth was the center of the universe until some guy was sitting around and thought, hey, maybe it's not. And then he went and tested it. And then we have tons of evidence for that new idea that it's not the center. And so that's just your intuition, um, being pulled from out of the void. We go about our business to try to test it in all the ways that we can to see if it holds up.
Hmm.
And there's another really interesting argument I've heard in that we think of like emotion and reason being two totally separate things. But I've heard this argument, I think it was by Sam Harris, that reason is emotional because the way we know something is sound, reasoned, or logicked is that it feels true. Like we always rely on that sense of like, ah, yes, okay, this feels right. Um, and that's just such our like truth barometer, I guess, is like, does it feel true? And I know it's certainly true for me in the spiritual realm. When you hear a teacher speaking, sometimes if there's just a resonance there, it's just this feels right, and that's all there is, and it's just following that feeling, um, that really can draw together these two seemingly separate things of reason.
Hmm. It's a really good point. In my book, I'm reading a book called Order of Time. I mentioned it in the channel, and I mean, it says something that I find all the time when we talk about great scientists. They just talk about he was amazing. He had an amazing intuition for this topic, you know. And I think often, you know, we're always weary of that intuition. I feel. But we also really like when someone's very in tune with that because of what they come up with.
Yeah, and I think there's even some Einstein quotes that put this very forcefully in that, like, nothing about what I discovered has to do with logic or reason. It was all just like feeling, intuition, something along those. And yeah, yeah, the great scientists are the ones that just keep pumping out good ideas, and they hold up over time, and then we go back and praise them for being pioneers. It's really what it is.
Yeah.
I really liked all the quotes in this chapter, like the poems and all the rest. Great.
Yeah. I hope we continue to get this, like all these. It's good to break up the content too.
Yeah.
Fine. See, make sure I went through all my notes.
Well, I know I highlighted something that I thought was interesting, and I'm just scrolling through.
All right, share it.
Yeah.
I just thought it like the whole male female. They mentioned it in. It might have been in the first chapter of this book, but there's this one part where it was talking about far from being the active agent, the subject of the verb, the doer and maker of things, the Tao does nothing, but nothing is left undone. And then it says, it has the power of passivity for which women have always been celebrated, and one might say that it is gravity, or that its gravity is its energy. And then it goes into a little excerpt and it says, know the male, but keep the female. And I just was curious about that piece about the passivity of women. And then I started thinking about just like different genders in general, and just the things that really make women women and men men, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And how we just biologically are like, we have different opportunities than men do, like having a child. And I was wondering if that's where they always are touching back on, is like the fact that we are almost like destined to endure these things, right? And the male counterpart is not, in a sense, and why that makes us so different, and why that makes us different maybe like emotionally too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just curious what you guys thought about that line, and like where it comes from, if you know more about where this comes from with just Taoism in general, about the male female. And I know he talked, it was in this book actually, where he was talking about just the difference between male and female, and how we fit together.
Yeah.
And I
I,
just thought it was interesting. And I interpreted it though as like that piece of like, as a woman, we have to, you know, I don't want to say that it's pain that men will never feel before or anything or ever, but there's things that we have to go through that men don't. And I wonder if that's where it comes from, where it's like women almost, you know, are taught from a young age that they have to go and deal with all these things. And we just have to come to acceptance of that, I guess. And I think it can make some of us a little bit more passive, because like it doesn't feel almost like an even playing field, I guess, at first.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
I feel like about men and women. I was like researching this for a while. It feels like
Mhm.
rather than becoming equal, they're trying to make us same. And this asexual being without any sexual desire. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I feel they're trying to like that. I feel like culture's trying to make them same. However, I feel it's not the same. I feel men are like different, have a different energy, have a different way of living, and I feel women have a different energy. And I think the dynamic is portrayed in this like analogy where how Aztec warriors, they're like super fierce warriors. Yeah, they go and they kill, but they like fight a day's battle and they come back and they like crawl up into like this baby, and the woman, their wife, like nurture them. It's gonna be all right. Pa, 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 pa.
Mhm.
I feel like a female energy has like that nurturing, kindling spirit, and male has like that go get, I feel like, get this done, pa, 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 stuff like that. And I feel it's a very different it's a very different purpose. However, if
Yeah,
you
well, it was. Oh, sorry. You can keep
no no
going.
no no,
I
that's
was
all I
just
had to
gonna
say.
say because it was funny because in the schools this week we had lost three male teachers, right? So they were let go or whatever happened with cuts or whatever. And I was talking with a speech therapist, and we were talking about the difference between the male and the female energy just in the school system, even. And she was like, the female energy is much more stern, and she felt like it's more unforgiving,
Mm-hmm.
which I found interesting because I always think that everyone, not everybody, but like the general interpretation is like this motherly, like um, emotional, forgiving energy. And she was describing the male energy as being a little more lax and um, allowing kids to just kind of be themselves and be, more of that passive, like what was mentioned in the book. And I'm not quite sure what they meant by the like what Watts meant by the passivity of women as being like a power for us. I don't know. I was trying to interpret it or like figure out
Mhm.
why they think that.
Well, I mean, one way I've started to see it is like, isn't it a phrase, like a known phrase, like the universe is female, God is female, something like that? Is that just a feminist?
God's female and she is black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know, this essence that's conveyed by Tao of not getting in your own way, allowing things, caring for things, that does feel a bit more like, a feminine energy, traditionally speaking. Not taking into account what Nina just said about how it's applied in school settings or whatever. But um, yeah, like not forcing, and it's like guys are the one who have the stereotypes of like the macho man, I'm gonna control and dominate, make
Hmm.
everything just so. And when seen from a spiritual perspective, it's like caring about other people is can be thought of as a so-called, I don't know, higher chakra. I don't really get into that stuff, but I think that's what it is, like a higher level of energy than like the need for power, control, and domination. And so from that lens, I mean, I think the blending of male and female can come through in spirituality as like the empathy for others as being female, and then like the equanimity of not being too hyper reactive as being the male side of things, and then the blend is like a fierce compassion.
Hmm.
Might be one way to see it as applied spiritual.
Yeah, that
And then
definitely helps.
I was just going to add on to what might be observing in a school setting. I know I've sort of caught in hints of this, but like because those stereotypes are out there of like women are more passive,
Hmm.
I've seen some women who are aware of this and will go out of their way to act more the opposite to command respect
Hmm.
and objection of the situation. Sure. Whereas maybe men can take more of a relaxed back seat because I know that my masculine presence at the end of the day will keep things in line so I can be at ease. Kids,
Yeah, that's true.
it could be totally different when you step into like a finance situation where you have all these insecure men like vying for power. I doubt there's going to be a lot of passivity there.
There's a really good talk. I'll link after this. I think it'll help shed some more light on your question, Nina, with
Mhm.
what the passivity note is really getting at. Um, my take is I mean I've thought about this quite a bit, and I feel like just naturally we no matter what your view of the world is, there is a recognition of two kinds of energy. I mean, and it's basically just yin and yang.
Mhm.
And in my experience, I find this to be completely unrelated to a person being a man or woman. I do think that being a man or a woman sort of sets someone with a default setting. Like if someone is a man, like born a
Mhm.
man, they're more likely, or just tend to have, especially with the influence of culture, um, that um, yeah, that male, that direct, um, like directional energy, whereas female energy or the yin is quote passive. But another word for passive is sort of like I was talking about with the book and the page is it's foundational. It's the
Mhm.
foundation of all things. Um, void is feminine energy in this way because everything comes out of void, and just like how life comes from the human female. Um, it's it involves both, but the actual like bringing life into the world um, comes from the female. And so I guess I kind of just I view them as two different kinds of energies that anyone can exhibit, and I think that culture has a huge impact on which one gets adopted as someone's default. And it's almost like tools, because like how
Mhm.
much I mean people talk about like what kind of energy are you going to put into this, you know you can go into like like in school you can go to like a group project and you can assert yourself and lead the group and make all the decisions, um, but that's only worthwhile as long as there's another form of energy that's going to help do the work and agree and provide the means and like other thoughts to make the project work. And I think most things kind of like unfold in that way.
Mhm.
And so in the note where it's like know the male but keep the female, um, I feel like by keeping this like we call it female, and I think that's a very limiting term for this kind
Mhm.
of energy. Because like what does that even mean? Like you go to different countries and like what being a woman means is so different. Being a
Mhm.
man is so different. um and so in the term of like Taoism and what they're getting at, I think it's just very much of you're recognizing both of these things. They're equally available to you. They're found in all of your decisions and they're found in your body. Um, and by keeping, I think, by keeping the female, like what it's really getting at is it kind of goes into the intuition, right?
Mhm.
Because intuition is passive. You don't try to intuit. It's just there. It's just like void. It's just there, and when you are in tune, it kind of just arrives. Whereas like decisions and actions and stuff, because you have to have a force that drives stuff, is the male. And that's why you should keep it, because you need direction. You need to move and do things. You can't just as much as maybe as much as I would like to just lay on the couch sometimes and do nothing and just be passive. There has to be something else to the mix. And so that's kind of how I view that. Um, and
Yeah,
I go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like,
and I think this is like the Western brain poking through, right? Thinking of male and female as the gender roles and not and all the stereotypes that come along with it, right? And not as just energy itself. Where that was like the missing piece, I think, while reading this for me was, and I think that they did start out like using anatomy, and I don't know if they were using some stereotypes in the first chapter, but um, thinking of it as like an energy that you're not judging and recognizing that it's in all of us, like you're saying, like it's equal in all of us to have both of those energies, then that's like the true that intuition, like you're talking about, using it in that way. So like not fighting against that energy that might not fit into that construct that's put out there like socially, which I think is like when all that identity piece gets muddled for a lot of people because they're told that they're not supposed to feel a certain way or act a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put it like that, it makes so much more sense to me, instead of like, because I like went immediately and like assigned the gender roles, right? So I'm thinking of it very literally, like, okay, like what do women have to endure, like compared to men, and like that way, and why that would make us more passive in the long run, right? But if you think about it as energies, it has like a totally different perspective.
I think there's a lot to
Yeah.
be said in that, though. Like what you bring up, like just the natural hardships and differences that come from like one gender or another. That's a real thing,
Yeah.
right? Like that's there's a lot of truth in that, um, and there's a lot unacknowledged about that. You know,
Hmm.
and it's fundamentally true. Like there are some things. I mean, if just stripping away society and cultural things. I had a really interesting. I mean, in some way it's sad, but I remember I was walking like with my friend, and this was a while back. But we were walking, and she was kind of like tense at one point, and I could tell, but I didn't really like want to like poke, and I don't know what she was thinking, whatever. But later on, she was describing our environment, and like there was like some guy walking around and kind of made her
Hmm.
anxious, and like her interpretation of like the situation that we're in versus mine, and we were just living in two different worlds, right? So like
Yeah.
there are a lot of cultural and societal things that just make these completely different. But like even if you just take those away, and not taking them away because they're not important, but it's just like to prove and show that they're just like fundamentally there are just stark differences between these two experiences, and there are natural things that arise from those experiences and natural energy that arises from those experiences and ways of life. So I think there's a lot there. So it's not to say that it couldn't be taken that way. I guess what my angle on it, I think that someone could read this by Watts, like the whole like women passivity, and they could take it as like a belief that women are like generally like just passive, and maybe even
Hmm.
should be passive. And several talks and listening to Watts for a while, I know that to not be true. So that's sort of what bridges my thinking to, well, let's think about it like an energetic way. But there are a lot of cultural things that are very relevant to that, um, that are worth digging into. The talk, it's only like 20 minutes that I'll link later. He goes into this a lot. He starts with, I joked with Rave because he was talking about like God being female,
Yeah.
and I said she is black because
Yeah.
like Watts talks with a story of like an astronaut going out and um, saying that he met God, and everyone's like, okay, then what about God? And he's like, well, she's black, and it just being this. completely opposite view of what God is in the Western mind. Because the God in the Western mind is an authoritative, comforting, but kind of scary father.
Yeah.
And a lot of society revolves around that model about, feeling protected and at home, and a little bit on edge about the father figure, you know,
Yeah.
the ruling figure. And that's just and really he's just saying, like, that's just a model. It's not as fundamental, like, to the universe as than most of us have been kind of led to believe. I mean, you've mentioned you've grown up Catholic. I mean, I did too. That's very much how God was growing up.
Hmm.
It was dad. It was big daddy, you know,
Yeah.
and he knew everything, you know, and
Yeah.
there was always guilt with doing wrong because you were letting dad down.
Hmm.
There's a lot to be said about that. I
Yeah.
think
It's a lot to
anywhere we
unpack.
find guilt, truly, like anywhere we find guilt, and it's in everything. It is truly in everything, and it's so fascinating how it is in everything. But there's a lot there when it comes to guilt.
What do you feel guilt is exactly? What is guilt?
What is guilt?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yep.
I think it's sometimes it's like just unrealistic expectations you put on yourself, I think. And I think it comes from so many different avenues, like the
Yeah.
media, your family, how you grew up, what they found important, what their values are, what you believe yourself to be, whether you are that thing or not, or what you want to be. There's just so many components to it in every situation.
Like, what is like guilt trying to say though? I don't get that. Feeling guilty.
Should, should and must.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my intuition is that it's like a specific case of cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you have beliefs that are inconsistent with behaviors, or one of them being inconsistent with the same thing. So inconsistent beliefs, inconsistent behaviors. And I
Hmm.
think guilt could arise from that same thing, beliefs being inconsistent with behaviors. I want to be on a diet, yet I just ate birthday cake. What now? What? Like I feel guilty. But I think the cases that we're referring to often come from beliefs or intentions on a personal level contradicting with values on a collective level. So there's a very clear set of expectations, values, norms on the collective level saying that, like, this is how people should behave or act.
Hmm.
And it's like, I guess your intentions would be aligned with that collective also, because if they weren't, then you just wouldn't care. But
Yeah.
your behavior is contradicting that. And then, like, guilt is the force that arises when that comes to light, when you're trying to figure out how to reconcile. Either something's wrong with that system or something's wrong with me. And I think guilt is the more of the latter, that, oh, something's wrong with me and my behavior because I'm inconsistent with these values that I hold and the collective hold.
Yeah, that makes sense. So would you like say that all negative emotions kind of point to an inconsistency with your within your beliefs and your behaviors and actions?
Ooh, negative emotion is a very broad term.
Yeah,
So
it
like
is.
fear could be a negative emotion, and fear can just arise when I'm in the presence of something dangerous. So my beliefs and
Mm.
attitudes and actions can be consistent, yet I'm still afraid. So I don't know that I would go that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Fear, yeah. Fear arises when you're in danger, perceived danger. Okay, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, makes sense. So guilt is very specific. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I know what anger is, and that's the only one I know, which is like you're trying to align the external world to your internal beliefs. using force, anger. You know, there's a for me, and that thing of anger is so satisfying for me. I wish I had that for every emotion. Oh, guilty is this. It's pointing to inconsistency. Okay, now I know what you're telling me. I can go look inside, look within.
Yeah, and it's a tough practice, and it probably not ever going to be totally accurate to put rigid
Yeah,
boundaries around something like an emotion.
yeah. It's so
Um,
personal too, right? How can you?
Very personal, and there's this philosophical thing that's like anytime you try to put a box, like a definition around a construct, if you really go into it, it like slips out from underneath your finger. You can't quite put a box.
Mhm.
But there's a judge that has a very famous quote where he was like presiding over a case that had to do with like, is something pornography or isn't it? And he's like, the judge was like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And that like is meant to capture hugely our intuitions on lots of concepts. Is
Mm,
that concepts are fluid, and we can't put a rigid definition on them, but yet the way our intuition works, we can see it and know whether it falls into that category or not.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
That's a big problem trying to, I mean, people invest in that a lot of like Instagram, for example, tries to, not allow porn on their site, but like, how do you program an algorithm that can detect porn 100% of the time accurate?
yeah,
And you wind up using these algorithms that just learn from people labeling, is it porn or not? And the algorithm learns from that labeling data. It's not like there's some a priori definition.
yeah.
Definitions and concepts, that's my business.
Good
Welcome to
stuff.
research.
You know,
What? Go
oh,
ahead, Vito.
no, I was about to like channel change a bit. No, I was just saying, I was realizing the past week how much, how unaware I am of my emotion. Like I never once like label, oh, I'm feeling angry. Oh, I like talk. You know what I mean? If someone points it out, I would agree with them. Yeah, but I never like took the time to like investigate or even label my own emotions, which I started doing recently. It's kind of helps, I guess, but which yeah. So when someone asks you what are the 10 things you like about yourself, I just freeze. I'm like, I don't know. What do I like about myself? It's mysterious.
10 things is a lot.
Damn, the 10 things is a lot, yeah. What were you
Yeah,
saying,
what do you
Books?
Um, I was just gonna touch on the guilt stuff.
Mm,
Because I uh, I really didn't give a lot of thought into guilt and shame, like those emotions, much until I like a few years back. I went to like therapy. It just like for my own like not for any like particular reason, just because I felt like I needed to
mm,
like to talk stuff out, and a lot of like a lot of work, at least like from what I picked up in conversations with a therapist, um, a lot of their work and study, at least my particular therapist, was on guilt and shame. And it's very interesting because a lot of their like ways and models of looking at things is through like a scientific model sort of way, but there's so much Taoism in what they're doing, and I just found that in like just identifying my own like sources of like guilt or where I felt guilty or felt ashamed or whatever, and then like sort of like letting this stuff, like, all these readings and talks and these ideas sort of partner up with it, it's really hard to not see it now in everything, and like in other people, and like where things come from. And I think we've talked about it before, like guilt being sort of like gripping, because like when you
Mhm.
feel guilt and you feel shame, you're not present, you're in the past. It's like what we said, like last week. You can't be guilty for things you haven't done. I mean, you can't be feel guilty for future things. I mean, you could for sure, uh, get in your head and play out scenarios and feel guilty over those. I mean, that's another level, I guess. But like real guilt, like where like you feel that you failed or came up short, or just made a bad decision. That's all in the past. That's things that have already happened, and so anything like that is clinging. It's gripping, and so that by recognizing that guilt and understanding that guilt so much more, came a deeper understanding of acceptance. And that's kind of like the something that we always sort of circle back to on these things, is acceptance. And I think the hard thing is with guilt and shame is, these are things that we want to push away, and because they feel they sting, and they're like failures, um, and we don't want to like sit with our failures and even admit that we like did fail and that we're going to fail again. Um,
What
but
are
I
you
would have never
accepting?
had those. What am I accepting?
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends, but ultimately that, uh, obviously, like when I'm acting or deciding, most times I'm just doing my best. I'm using the knowledge that I have, and sometimes it's just not enough. Sometimes I'm not enough, and
Mm.
the only way that I could know that is by experiencing it and having those moments and those experiences. So through experiencing deep guilt and feeling that, came a deeper understanding of where I could find acceptance for that too. Um, and I mean, it's very hard and painful, of course, but so is pushing it away, and like unacknowledge you just the unacknowledgement and pushing away of these things, um like the denial. I often think of these things as like, like all these things sort of like sit as voices in our head. I mean, it's our own voice, but like we like mull over in our head over and over. And when we push it away, for a while it's quiet, but it only has to yell louder the further you push it away.
Yeah.
And I feel like these things you could push so far away that maybe you cut off the inner dialogue. It shuts down in your mind, but then it begins to be projected with your body, like in your actions, right? We
Yeah.
see this all the time. If someone feels guilty, but maybe they don't even recognize that they are, they project with their speech. Like,
Yeah.
the person who's defending themselves the loudest is often the one who's guilty, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, like what I'm accepting is I'm just accepting, myself. I'm accepting other people too. I think that's the big one.
Uh-huh.
Um, because
Yeah.
anytime Carl Jung says it, he's like, whatever you are condemning and whatever you criticize in others, you are just unaware of in yourself. And when you take that approach of like all of what that person is I am fully capable of doing that. That's a very uncomfortable. I mean, that can easily become a very uncomfortable inner dialogue. Especially, I mean, there's so many examples that we could bring up where like I'm nothing like them. There's no way I'm like them, but you could be. And the more
Yeah.
that you could accept that, um, that critic becomes more and more quiet. Um, I think it's hard because it's a matter of ego, right? Like where I was
Yeah.
born and the family I was raised in and all the things I experienced, there's no way that I could be like anyone else. And that's true. Like I can only be me. But that's really not being being fair when we're looking at other people, because you're not trying to be them. You're not being born as them and being raised as them and going through what they're going through. And all of this isn't really to um, take away responsibility for people's actions. I think it's usually taken that way, right? It's like, well, if I understand them, I can't really blame them for anything. And that's not really the case. It's just a matter of understanding and that you are capable of it. Like you truly are. And I think that's just important to keep in your mind. You don't really have to do anything with it either. You just have to keep it in your mind.
You've serendipitously touched on something I just read from a very well-known teacher from what's called the Thai forest tradition, but he has a simple instruction that says, like, whenever you notice yourself, I think, judging others, you bring in the phrase "just like me." So it's like, oh, that person's a jerk, and then, oh, just like me. Like any way in which you can perceive somebody not living up to whatever your expectations are, you just reflect, oh, that can be like me too, just like me. It's supposed to
When you
soften.
when you said just like me, is it like when you like perceive someone to be a jerk, you can only perceive him to be a jerk because you also are a jerk or can be a jerk or something like that?
Yeah, I guess it's less about like that person. Like it just like brings some space and maybe humor to the situation of like, oh, I can be a jerk too. That instinct or that emotion behavior that's in me. That's come out before. Just like
Mm.
me.
Yeah, I think it just shows how complex people are too. Because I mean, you're seeing one action sometimes, and you know yourself when you say "just like me." Well, I can be so many other things as well. So it's not just the jerk persona all the time. Where so it just kind of, I think it brings us all together too. Um, it's like we all experience guilt. It's like we all have that in common,
Yeah.
but we try to like hide it away a lot of the times.
Yeah, I think
There's
it
a part of us that also says, "Oh, that's not us." Oh, he's a
Well,
jerk,
because
but I'm
yeah.
not.
yeah, that's the distancing, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's I think it's such a useful technique to safeguard against what can happen even in spiritual practice, which is like, I'm doing all this stuff, so like, okay, I'll be good and you guys are all screwed. you know? But it's
Mm.
like this is just a little whisper that brings together instead of, oh, we're all, this is all just the soup we're in.
You feel when we like reject that part, even something like, "Oh, you're doing something that's bad, not supposed to do it," or something like that, and not accept it. We kind of like reject a part of ourselves too in that process.
Are you saying like if you say like they're not like me, that's sort of rejecting?
Yeah, like I'm thinking if I say, "Oh, you know what? You're a jerk. You're a bad guy, or whatever." There's like an there's an implication that I'm not like that. Oh, I'm good. He's bad. And I feel like if we reject, let's say there is some bad things about us, but you kind of like externally believe that, oh, I'm not like that. But let's say there is, then you feel like that would like manifest into some, I don't know, like shadow and like cause problems. Because I feel with emotions, your body can still feel it, and the body still reacts. Know what I mean? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, oh, you know what? This guy's a jerk. It's part of being a human. And if you just accept that, it makes it more probable of us not being a jerk because there's no conscious awareness shine onto the other side of the duality of, oh, I'm not a jerk. You know what I'm saying? Fuck. I feel I'm saying something
Mhm.
really confusing.
No, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And that's what
Yeah,
you
I
have to
think
kind of accept, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. There's a theory. I'm just thinking, have I done something like this in the past where it has negatively affected me? I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, we all have,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that's
Can't remember
that's just
any
the
though. Yeah.
experience. Like it's inevitable. We're just gonna go through it.
I feel if you, mm, you feel if you just accept that, you know what, humans can be this way. You know what, humans can fucking destroy environment. Yeah, they can. Okay. You feel it's easier to like change then? or be at peace with it at least. I don't know.
Well, I think it's funny if you think about like all these thoughts that pop into your head, they just happen. There's like no way to stop any of them, any of those like judgments that come up. Like there's that natural boom, like instinct comes in, and then whatever influences that happened before that led you to that place, they're in there no matter what you do. You could fight it as much as you want. You can say that you want to be more accepting, but you're still going to have those thoughts that come in.
Yeah,
So it's like more about how you handle those thoughts when they come through. So it's like, oh wow, like yeah, I'm feeling like this person's a jerk right now, but I'm just going to accept it and move on kind of thing, which
yeah,
is easier said than done, of course, but I do think that that's like the turning point for me. Like I used to always try to stop the thought, and that is like impossible.
Yeah,
yeah,
because you didn't put it there.
Yeah, and we were
yeah,
talking at the beginning of all this about like unraveling ourselves, like becoming the uncarved block. Like unfortunately, like we're not going to be able to go back to a little baby that doesn't know anything and just start fresh again, blank slate, like at least in this life.
Once
As
once
much as we
carved, you're
try.
carved.
You feel like
Yeah,
that's a
like
game though. I feel if I just accept that, you know what, you can be a jerk, and you know what, I can also not choose to not be a jerk. But there's nothing wrong in you being a jerk, and it almost become like a police thief kind of chase, which makes it fun, I guess, in a way. Oh, the thief is gonna steal,
yeah.
and the cops is there to like prevent this guy from stealing, and it's like a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's like so funny because I always think about this too, where I'm so in my head all the time about like what I'm doing, how I'm portraying myself. Am I being professional? Um,
Yeah,
like I'll do some like public speaking sometimes for work, and I'm like, oh boy, like I'm so worried about what everyone's gonna think. And it's like when you think about it, everyone's very similar and they're thinking about themselves and the
yeah,
portrayal of themselves, or like so we are all the same at the end of the day. And I think back in the chapter too, like just talking about like oneness, all of us can help lead you towards that acceptance. Because if we're all that similar, then we're all struggling with the same thing. And then it's like, well, what's the struggle for if we all feel the same way? Like, what's there to feel guilty for? What's there to judge? Because we
yeah.
are all the same, kind of,
Yeah.
in a sense. It sounds so easy, right? When you say it out loud, like,
I feel
Oh
it is
yeah.
very
When
easy to like accept any one side of the duality. I feel it's easy to accept, you know what, I'm not a jerk or I'm a jerk. But it's very hard
yeah.
to accept both because it's so contradicting.
Well, I
Uh,
loved this line. I actually wrote it down,
Okay.
and it was something, and it went further along. And it was just talking about how you can't have one thing without the other, and like everything kind of has its purpose. And it was saying how like the sun would not be light without the eyes. And um I don't have all the other pieces written down, but it was just like you can't have all the great things without the bad things. You can't have all these like good traits without bad traits. It's just like it is true how it's almost like there's a purpose for everything, but we try so hard to like define and control and just fit into those boxes again, that's when things get all muddled and it gets harder to manage. And the anxiety piece trying to prevent nature from happening.
That's yeah,
And it's like at the end of the day, even if I feel like I did a good job and I was professional and I did what I was supposed to and I made someone feel good, there's still like another thing that happened that I'm like, oh, maybe that wasn't so great, or maybe they took this one word the wrong way and I offended them somehow. It's like
yeah,
it's never ending. So until you just accept that, yeah, sometimes someone's gonna take something the wrong way, or sometimes somebody's gonna think you're a jerk, or then you can live more free.
Yep.
yeah,
But
I think some of
but
this comes from what the question that gets put on us is like, where do your thoughts come from? I mean, this chapter says your thoughts grow from a brain, like grass in a field, and we all feel no attachment to grass growing. It just happens.
Yeah.
We recognize that as an automatic, completely just thing that happens. But our thoughts, we take a lot more ownership for and responsibility for, and to a degree. I mean, just like you communicated, Nina. You didn't have like you have thoughts that you try to push away, but you didn't put that thought there. It just happened.
Hmm.
It's a separate event in some way, and it's a really big challenge to stop something that you never even started.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, I've read about people who've had intrusive thoughts that, like, sometimes moms after when they have postpartum depression, they'll have these intrusive thoughts of like wanting to kill their baby, or like, these things
My
that,
God.
yeah, like just scary thoughts, but it's like the brain's way of like filling time, basically. It's like, really, it's like, oh well, let me rile her up a little bit, and um
Damn.
it doesn't inherently mean that that's what that person believes, and a lot of times it is just like a mental health issue, but it just goes to show that you can have thoughts, but what really matters is like how you react to that thought. It's like, this thought makes me uncomfortable, so I'm not going to act on that, and I'm going to move forward. Instead I think we just like will sit on them for so long.
And like
I
try to
feel
think
like
your way
any if
out.
oh, I'm sorry, Ray, what were you saying?
I was gonna say, I feel like the instinct is to, when you're having thoughts you don't like, is to think your way out of it, right? Is
Yeah.
is like trying to use a fire to burn a fire.
Put out a fire.
Yeah, just spirals you further.
Yeah. I feel you know okay, so I'm coming back to this, right? But I'm doing like this meditation thing, the thing where you call becoming aware of the awareness. Yeah. I think you would be aware.
Oh,
I think you would know this, Rave. It's like you become so there are things that's happening, right? And there's this awareness that is perceiving it, and you do like this meditation where you become conscious of this awareness. And when you
that's the most powerful meditation I've ever done. I'll just throw that out there. That's
really,
good stuff. Oh
man,
yeah.
yeah. So when I was doing that, right? Uh, so there is thoughts, everything, and there is me being aware of the thoughts, and then there is me being aware of that awareness. Yeah, being aware of the thoughts. Okay, okay. What's funny is most of the thoughts that I start. Oh yeah, I should feel like this. I should pa 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 pa. It is like it didn't feel like me. I didn't feel I was the thoughts. I feel like there was like a small disconnect where you're aware of it's like you're the guy perceiving the thoughts, but the thoughts are not you. Because if the thoughts are you, how would you perceive it? But I feel like you're rather something that's aware of those thoughts. And I feel like that identity thingy becomes very I cannot like stopped. I did it like twice or thrice, then I stopped because I started contemplating like wh- what I what am I really then? I'm getting existential. Now,
Yeah.
because
Well,
on a natural state, a normal, no, when I'm in a normal state, I guess, any thought I think, oh yeah, this thought is me. Oh yeah, I have anxiety, I'm a guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It makes sense. But when you
That's
like, when you become aware of this awareness and you become this thing that's becoming conscious of the thoughts and stuff, then you have to like question, like, okay, what the fuck am I then? Am I really these thoughts? I don't know, shit.
that's so funny that you said that, because when I started dealing with anxiety, I used to call it A for myself, because I was like, I will not identify as anxiety. So it's A, and it's like a person that is like on my shoulder that is sitting there like whispering in my ear all the time, making me uncomfortable. And I'm just going to tell it to back off. And like thinking of it like that, and it being like, that's
It's
not
actually
who
really
I
nice.
am. yeah, it's not who I am, made me feel not guilty about the anxiety piece, because I used to always like beat myself up over like, I don't understand why I'm feeling this way, or like, this makes no sense and it's hurtful. And why can't I just be like normal, whatever normal is, you know?
Yeah.
But when I assigned it its own identity and I was like, you are not really a part of me, you're like your own thing, it took the judgment and the guilt out of all of it, where I was like, okay, like this isn't me, this is just anxiety.
Damn, that's actually
So
really good.
yeah, and it's like a way, I mean, you could do that with any emotion even, which I think it's so cool. Like, I don't know, back to Disney movies, but that movie Inside Out
Oh yeah.
um is about all the emotions, and they basically have their own person, like they're their own personalities based on these emotions. And it's really helpful to think about it like that, at least it was for me, because then it's not you, you know? Like I can look at anger and not feel like I'm this angry, awful thing. It's just this little thing on my shoulder or whatever, you know? It's not really like a true reflection of myself. So that
Yeah.
helped me like get through some tough times where I was like beating myself up, which just is like that cycle
Yeah.
where you're just constantly like, this is me, and it's
Yeah.
hard to get out of that hole. But that's what that just reminded me of when you were talking about the identity piece.
That's a therapy technique, by the
Really?
way. That's so interesting that you just naturally fell into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like had started therapy when I was young, but then stopped for a long time, and then have since gone back because I think everybody should. I think it's a really nice way to just get things out of your head.
So not interesting. There's
But yeah,
actually
it was.
yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say that it was kind of like I had to find a survival, like like a way to survive, because
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
find myself like getting lost in it, and I didn't like that feeling. So I was like, well, how can I not sit in this feeling? And that was the way that I kind of came around to it. I don't know, it's been helpful, but I'm sure it was from all the bits and pieces from a lot of different things that I've heard around from
No, it's interesting
therapy
you
and
say
not
that
therapy.
because I came across another thing. There's a guy I'm
Hmm.
trying to research now called Neville Gorar or something like that. Yeah. And he has this
Hmm.
thing where he says, "Oh, isn't it wonderful meditation?" Yeah. Where you just keep repeating, "Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful this happened? Isn't it wonderful that happened?" Pa, 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 pa. You know?
Hmm.
And it's like I do know for a fact when I am positive, things flow more easier. Like the Wu Wei thing happens more effortlessly. Yeah, nothing feels
Hmm.
like a burden anymore. But I also know that when I'm experiencing the negative emotions, I do get like kind of stuck a little bit. It's very hard to process the world. Everything like goes in that direction, which you don't want it to go. But for some reason, I don't know. It it just made I don't know why uh, there's this thing where I don't know whether you experience it or not. Where it's like, oh, if I figure this out, anxiety, or if I find the root of this anxiety, I
Hmm.
can I can like fix it. Boom, solve the mystery. But it never fixes. It's just better than what. Fuck this. This is not me. Yeah, isn't this wonderful
Uh-huh.
that I get to do this and just keep doing that and just feel good and then yeah. But this aspect of me which just says that okay, are you like ignoring the problem?
Well, the funny thing about that, I always think about panic attacks, for example. And I consider myself like, I mean, I'm not a scientist by any means, but I have some kind of knowledge of like,
Yeah.
all right, well, how many trials does it take to prove a point, basically? So, panic attacks, it's like every time you feel like you're going to die, like, you're like, this is it. I'm done. Like, the heart attack's coming, and this, say my goodbyes, right? But it's like no matter how many times I have one and I survive, I like always, anytime it pops up again, it's like, nope, this is it. Now this time is the the one time that it's gonna happen. So like
Yeah.
when that logic got thrown out the window for me was when I started laughing at it, because I'm like, I'm a logical person. I feel like in other ways. So this makes no sense for me to be this worried about that piece. And yeah, and I think that's like when you're thinking about anxiety in this like logical sense, and you're trying to find that, you know, the cause and effect of anxiety for yourself. There's so many times where I would be sitting there for days trying to figure out why I'm feeling a certain way, and there would be no reason. And that's what was kind of proving to me that sometimes you're just going to feel things and it's not going to have that piece attached to it. And no matter how hard you try to prevent it from happening, it's going to happen again. And once I let go of like, you know, there's things I can do that, you know, eat right, exercise, all that kind of stuff. Like, you know, I've recognized that there's some simple, tangible things that I could do to like feel a little bit better. But, you know, there's always going to be that day that I'm like, I'm having a panic attack for no reason. And that's when I start laughing, because I'm like, how funny is this? Right? Like, it has no purpose. It's just there. And I'm like, you know, how ridiculous is that? And I end up just starting to find it a little bit funny. And that's what's kind of like helped me too, is just so many times of well, I can't find a reason why, so why am I going to waste my energy on trying to find that reason? Instead, I should just focus on, I feel this way right now, maybe I'll just go for a walk without any expectation for it to make me feel better, but just move on with the day.
You know what's funny? When you're in the positive state of mind, you do find the reason. Just comes to you. Oh, this person said this and I didn't like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And sometimes when you're too in yourself and you start talking to somebody else about it, then you realize, like I've had conversations and then people are like, oh, well, you've been having a really stressful week. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because we are the hardest on ourselves. That's true. But
there was a girl at the meditation retreat I went to who shared a practice she did with difficult emotions. Pretty skillful. She said something along the lines of, anytime she would eat, she would like imagine a teddy that represented that emotion. When that emotion came, the teddy bear, and that, you know, she was in that space, she would just sort of care for it.
You were saying, I couldn't quite hear you. Like the teddy bears, she gave the emotion to the teddy bear.
Well, no, it's like the teddy bear represents the emotion. So as the teddy bear, and then when it's, as long as it's there, you care for it. This idea that some famous person said, like, whatever arises in your mind, you welcome your as guest for tea.
Can you repeat that, Rafe? What was the meditation exactly? And can you come a little bit closer to the microphone?
Okay, I'm in phone mode now.
Oh,
whoa, that's so different.
Yeah. Like, okay.
He's surfaced. He's not underwater anymore.
Yeah.
It's so weird that the speaker doesn't work. I don't want to have to hold my phone to my ear, but okay. Yeah, so this girl was practicing with difficult emotions, right? And as they were arising, she would imagine them as being teddy bears that would come to her as these emotions would have. So, you know, there's a teddy bear for sadness and a teddy bear for anger or guilt, whatever. And so she would identify it and like care for this teddy bear as long as it was present, and then, you know, be with it until it leaves. Is similar to what a famous person said, that like whatever arises in your mind, you welcome into your awareness the same way you would a guest into your house. For I think the real subtle trick to opening to something is that you have to open it to it as if it would be there forever. And the real subtle miss there is opening to it so that you can get rid of it, because you're still holding on a bit. You know? So as soon as you can open to it and be like, the world is like with this emotion present, and get curious and investigate, be with it as if it'll stay hard. You're sad, you don't want to be sad anymore. That's when you release into that space where it's allowed to.
Yep.
I also have a hard stop at 12, so I might need to start saying my goodbyes.
Okay.
Yeah, I do as well. I always hate to, but you know, that's
That-
life.
There to it.
All
Yeah.
things that start have to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Catch next week. But yeah, the last segment was really good. Like, yeah, it's really interesting. That thing that you said, you have to like invite everything as if it's like a guest, and as if the guest is not gonna leave. Well, so you're gonna stay maybe for a long time. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's a very
I
good
wish,
note, Rave.
I wish I could
Mhm.
remember who said that. I think it's some type of poet. I forget.
Rave's like slowly becoming our like poet source,
Yeah.
poem source.
I know.
He
I
ended
asked
last
him.
week.
Yeah.
I was like, "How did you come up with all this stuff?" You know. He
Last
was-
week was Rumi, right? This week is
Last week was.
yeah.
Let me look real quick. Maybe.
I mean, there's a lot to say about that. It's just, I mean, that's full release of any of like wanting or having must for a different state.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's like it's said so much is like once you let go of controlling, you've got it. Like
Yeah.
that's the weird like paradox nature of control.
Oh
It's
my.
like
Yeah.
once you completely released it is exactly where you find it.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's so bizarre.
Well, this was
Yeah.
great.
Yep.
Yes.
This one
Um,
deal. Can you guys still hear me? I'm on speaker now.
I can
Yeah.
hear you.
All right. So keeping in the theme of closing with poems, this one deals with joy. Instead, I don't know where the invite your sorrows into your house comes, but from William Blake. He who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy, but he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise.
Wow.
I'm
I think
liking
is
this. I'm
also
liking this routine of
Yeah.
Rave closing out
Mhm.
the poem.
Yeah. Close out with the poem, Rave. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'll
No
make it
pressure.
No
more
pressure.
communal now. Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys, everyone else can bring poems too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I
Oh
like
yeah.
that.
You read poems as if you never have to read poems. Let go of the control, and boom, every week we'll have a poem. Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
All
great
right
talk,
then. Yep.
everyone.
Guess.
I really
Yeah.
enjoyed.
Yeah. Me too.
And then
Me
next
too.
week is a chapter
And
about
Ray,
Wu Wei, so I'm sure we'll have nothing to say about it.
Yeah. There you go. We don't even have to like time ourselves. We just show up, the right place, the right time. Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
All right. See you
Well,
guys. Bye.
have a good weekend, everyone. Have a good week. All
You
Yep.
too.
You
yep.
too.
Bye.
right.
Bye.
See ya.